Hello again, and welcome to my video about Final Fantasy XVI's most recent trailer, Revenge. I decided to make this video since I made a video on the last trailer. I plan on delving more into story in this video and less into gameplay. But the thing is, this trailer mostly showed us new gameplay stuff. A lot of the story stuff that they showed confirmed old theories I had in the last video that you're free to watch, or presented us with new totally off-the-wall stuff that, quite frankly, I have no clue about, other than about where it might happen in the story. Since this trailer review might end up being a little shorter than my last one, I decided that I'll also look at the Japanese website since they have a lot more information than the American one, and a lot of that information is actually focused on the story. So after the trailer review, we'll look at the stuff on the website and try to gather as much as we can about the story as we know it so far. So we start the trailer off in what I like to call the prologue section. This is the young Clive phase, and this is the very end of young Clive phase. So this is where Clive, Joshua, and the Archduke are trying to run away. The Empire's invading, and as we all know, the Archduke dies. Joshua maybe dies, but we'll see later. It's weird. It's weird. The Dark Ifrit shows up. We see the face of the guy who betrays him, and he's definitely wearing Rosaria armor. So not really much new in this scene. We then go into some gameplay. Again, I mentioned this earlier, not going to go in depth into gameplay, but it's nice to see some new environments. Plus, we do see some interesting enemies, but I might come back to that later when we look at the screenshots, because the screenshots actually have the UI on. So in this next scene, we see Clive overlooking a battlefield. However, if you pay close attention to the vegetation, the scene where Clive is looking over the battlefield is very deserty, almost like the original battle of the Iron Kingdom versus Dhalmekia. However, when Odin comes down and kills all these soldiers, there's like shrubland in the background. So these are actually two different scenes. We then have Shiva firing some icicles at some men with ballista. This is probably the war that we already know about between Dhalmekia and the Iron Kingdom, where she's basically being used by the Iron Kingdom as a weapon. Alright, and we get to this part of the trailer. And this is really probably one of the key points of the trailer, considering the trailer is named Revenge. And this is where he has that whole line, I don't know if I control revenge or if revenge controls me. I'm just going to stop here for a moment and say this is obviously a key character of the game. There's a million different things they could be. Leading theories I read about all the time now are this is some alternative version of Clive, maybe from the future, maybe a lost twin, maybe something related to Clive, because they both transform into Ifrit. So it's kind of the obvious first guess. I'm not sure. My personal leanings are more towards some sort of ancient cult, probably related to the fallen civilization that we will actually get into later. But no one knows. I mean, and I don't think we're going to know until we play the game. So that being said, there's really no new info here. It just kind of confirmed an old theory I had that Clive would have been there when Josh was murdered and saw this guy transform into Ifrit, and this became the object of his vengeance. So with that said, let's kind of move ahead, because there's a nice smooth cut here, and we go to the Garuda site. And as I just mentioned, Garuda's eyes are yellow. I mentioned that in the last trailer. This isn't new. What is new is Clive transforming, and Clive has yellow eyes. And then he beats the crap out of Garuda. So here, we have seen Clive with blue, or we've seen an Ifrit with blue eyes. In fact, later in this trailer, there's an Ifrit with blue eyes. Is that the other Ifrit? Maybe. Like I said, my leading theory is just that blue eyes represents when the human, the dominant, is in control, and yellow eyes is when they lose control of their emotions, and maybe even the icon is in control. There's that whole tapestry at the end of the last trailer, and all the icons on that tapestry have halos. Maybe they are godly beings or angels, and they all have their own personality and their own motives. That's yet to be seen, and we probably won't know until we play the game. And so that brings us to this scene. This scene is actually brand new with this trailer. We have never seen this before. I think they wanted to use it kind of as an introduction to the party, because this is also the first time they've confirmed the party outside of interviews. Interestingly, this looks like the inside of a Mother Crystal, and in fact, there's a picture we'll look at later that looks like it's probably from this setting. You look around the arena where they're fighting this big crystalline dragon, and there's water flowing everywhere. The colors are pretty blue. I imagine this is some sort of water crystal, which makes me think it's Crystalline Dominion, but it seems kind of early to do that, but who knows. And yeah, we fight this crystalline dragon, and we're probably there to destroy the Mother Crystal, which we will talk about later when we talk about the Japanese website stuff. The next scene I thought was actually pretty clever. They kind of extended a scene that we've already seen in the Imperial Dragoon fight, and now we just see Cidus fighting along with us. Nothing really new here to speak of. The next couple scenes are really quick and just a couple fight scenes. There's no real UI to look at, so there's not too much to speak of. We'll get more into that with pictures. So the next scene we have is again an expanded scene. We've seen Clive holding his arm with the fire all around him before in past trailers. This time it continues and we see Ifrit kind of standing over him while he's contemplating something, and eventually he turns into Ifrit and fights the other Ifrit. Now, this scene again, like I said, was kind of shown before, but the scene does more definitively show that there is a second Ifrit. We've kind of known it since the Dominance trailer at that last little cut. Another thing I must say is it's entirely possible that this is a bit of a red herring. If you look at the background is a Rosaria that is on fire. It's been destroyed completely, like the castle has, and it's on fire. So it's possible that this is taking place in the real world. The other thing to consider, though, is that this other Ifrit is literally just standing over him for a few seconds at least while he just transforms into Ifrit himself, which makes me wonder what the intention by the developers are here. I think it's possible that this is some sort of internal conflict between Ifrit and Clive, and them duking out Naruto style with the Jinchurikis. So while this might just be a real in-world scene, it's entirely possible that this is kind of within Clive's mind palace, if you will. And so one final note, take a look at the eyes in this scene. Ifrit's eyes are blue, and we saw Clive earlier in this trailer transform and he had orange eyes. So either the blue eyes represents the Dark Ifrit, or like I mentioned earlier, what I think is more likely, the blue eyes represent when the Dominant is in control, and the orange eyes represent when the icon itself is in control. And I think that might be a trend that we see going through, because we've seen like Hugo with orange and blue eyes as well. And so time for rapid fire. We have Clive and Torgal and a companion, probably Cid, running through the desert on Chocobo back. We have young Clive running up to the castle of Rosaria. And then we have Clive petting Torgal with Jill in the background. And then we have Jill and Torgal and Clive stuck in the elevator routine, where we get ambushed by enemies on an elevator and we do a little fight, followed by Clive doing some electric move. So that was the rapid fire. There's no UI for any of that. Some of it was kind of cool to see with like what looked kind of like traders in front of the castle. We saw Clive's run animation. We saw Clive on Chocobo back, which was almost a given Yoshi P's history. So not a ton to say. But the next scene, there is something to say. So this next scene, it appears to take place in a volcano. If you look at the background, there's fire all over, and the only place there's a volcano is Drake's Breath, as far as I know. So this would be kind of in the Iron Kingdom at Drake's Breath. You see Phoenix's wings in the background, and you see an older Clive with a younger Joshua. So that is also very strange. So there's some implications to this. This scene births a lot more new theories, as there is no current explanation for it. But all we know is that this ties into Clive's motives to some extent, since he says he's waited 13 years for this. Although, just to be fair, that could be a trailer cut. That might not be the audio that actually plays in that scene. And the only other thing that we can really glean from this is, if you look at Clive's armor and face, you can tell that this kind of takes place in the middle point of the game, since Clive still has the tattoo on his face, and we know later on he loses that tattoo. So, totally new stuff from this trailer. This is probably one of the first scenes that is totally new, but it doesn't really tell us a ton. And so the next scene is also entirely new. There's some weird wraith-like creature who like shoots laser beams out of their eye, and Clive is standing there with like lasers falling around him. But again, there's not a ton to take away from this other than the fact that the game's gonna get weird. I've seen some people try to link this person to one of the bearers on the website. That we'll look at that image later. I think it's kind of a stretch. If I were to guess, this is probably linked to the Fallen Civilization that we will also talk about later. But all you can do right now is guess. In this next scene, I'm gonna freeze frame for a second. This goes back to my last video. So in my last video, I stopped on one frame where Clive was apparently missing the brand on his cheek. I pointed to that frame to try to show that we've probably seen the older Clive. And well, here we go. Here is an older Clive without the brand on his cheek who is summoning Ifrit. There's not really a ton else to say here other than here you go. This also connects to the Hugo fight, as if you go back to the, I think, Dominance trailer and you look at the Hugo fight, for a split second you'll see Clive's cheek and he will be missing the brand there. So it kind of tells you that that will take place later on in the story. There will probably be some moment where Clive gets rid of that brand, because for every other scene we've seen in this trailer, Clive has had the brand. And so now there's one really quick scene where it looks like Bahamut is about to fire off like a mega flare or something. There's not a ton to be seen here. You might see Torgal in the foreground. It's definitely Clive who's being shot at, but not a ton of new information to glean. Then we get to an extension of the Titan fight by the looks of it. Hugo at this point has orange eyes. He started the fight with blue eyes, so that kind of indicates that maybe he loses control during the fight as he's losing. And then finally we get to this giant golem looking thing, or whatever it is. There's a lot of theories as to what it might be, but all that aside, I think the only interesting thing to note is that his core, maybe he doesn't really have eyes, but his essence is glowing blue. So to me, if the themes are being followed, that means that whoever is controlling it is in control. Whoever the dominant is in control. So really cool looking stuff, really cool actiony stuff, but it's really hard to take anything away from it, at least from a story perspective, which is what I really mostly want to focus on. So with that, we're at the end of the trailer. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I kind of want to hop onto the Japanese website so I can set a couple things in stone. All right, and now let's hop over to the Japanese website. So as I mentioned earlier, for whatever reason, the North American website hasn't been updated, but the Japanese website has. So you'll see that I'm currently translating with Google Translate the pages that we're going to look at. For instance, here with Clive, I think the boyhoods and adolescence tabs are new. All they do is they change the image on the right because that's the new image of Clive. The description for Clive is pretty much the same. The only real change is the last sentence where it says, before long, he becomes embroiled in a great tragedy and becomes an avenger who pursues the mysterious summoned beast Black Ifrit that caused the tragedy. I think when this is translated in English, that'll probably be translated as Dark Ifrit, but regardless, it gives a little bit of context about Clive's motive in the story. Going forward, scrolling down, we go past Joshua. Joshua's is the same. Now, Jill's is totally new. Now, they refer to Jill as a boy. Must be a translation issue. Doesn't really matter. You can now see an image of adolescent Jill on the right, and her description has been updated to tell us that she is the dominant of Shiva, like we have all been guessing for like ever. This was really more of a confirmation that Jill is Shiva's dominant, and a little bit of an insight into her personality, as her quote at the top says, "I live to protect you." It seems like she's very dedicated to Clive for whatever reason. She must see it as her duty of some sort. We then have Torgal. We've known about Torgal since the interviews when they name dropped him. He's just the companion that's along with Clive. Later on, we'll see he's like the only controllable companion that we have in the story. And he's a good boy all around. And then the next one on the list is Sidolphus Telamon. So this is this game Sid. I had guessed that in the last trailer, if you remember, when I talked about the person with Clive. There was Sid, Clive, and then a big man who was holding Jill, if you remember in the last trailer. At that point, I called this guy Sid, and I guessed that the big guy's probably Biggs. Still stand by that. The Sid in this game is the leader of an organization that basically tries to treat everyone equally, including bearers. He seems to be something of a researcher trying to figure out what causes the blight and how to stop the blight, and he seems like he'll be an integral part of the story. He's also Ramuh's dominant. Also, if you look at the last sentence, the other interesting little bit, and I think I might have mentioned this in the last one, he once belonged to the kingdom of Wallod, and seems to be acquainted with Benedicta. I had thought maybe he was a king or something of Wallod before he was kicked out by Barnabas. Seems like maybe he was just there first, because I believe somewhere it says that he's not a native of the continent of Ash, so he, like Barnabas, came from an outside land to Wallod, and he might have gotten kicked out by Barnabas. Benedicta, the only real change is her quote, "You are the only one who has pity on me, Sidolphus." So apparently she doesn't like being pitied by Sid, which that might be the instigator of the first fight that we see, because we see Sid and Benedicta fight. Her description really hasn't changed from what we've seen before. Hugo is next. Not really much has changed with Hugo. Dion, I believe this description's the same, the quote's new. Pretty much the same as we knew before. And Barnabas, which, again, I believe Barnabas's description's basically the same. If it's not, then I don't think there's anything hugely new. I think the biggest thing, and we'll get into this in a little bit, is his quote, "How beautiful the disappearance of the Mother Crystal is." We actually found out with this JP update on the website that one of Clive's main goals in the story is going to be to destroy all the Mother Crystals, because apparently the blight stems from the Mother Crystals, or at least that's the leading theory. So maybe Barnabas is using Clive as a tool to get rid of the Mother Crystal, since he also wants to do it. I think it's pretty clear that at some point, I mean, we even see it, Barnabas will be an antagonist, but he probably starts as an ally, is my guess. And that's it for the character overviews, and just trying to go fast here. And so here in the story tab, all right, so here's the story overview. I think the only really interesting part is what I just kind of mentioned, the last line. Bearing a harsh fate, Clive eventually learns the truth about the world and sets his sights on destroying the Mother Crystal. So there you go. That's the story of Final Fantasy XVI in a nutshell. I'm going to skip the Valicithia weird translation part. I'm going to skip the dominant part because there's nothing really all that interesting here. This is what I mentioned earlier with the weird transform floating thing shooting eye lasers. Someone had mentioned that the character in this image kind of vaguely resembles that eye laser thing, but I think that's a bit of a stretch and I don't really see it too much. But the reason I'm really coming here, so this is the bearer section, and you will notice that the bearer shown in the picture has the same brand on his cheek that Clive does. So that tells us that Clive early on is branded as a bearer. And from the interviews, we know that bearers are basically seen as second-class citizens most everywhere. And Cid's description also helps support that, right? He's trying to create a society that accepts bearers for who they are. As the description says, their treatment varies greatly from country to country. We know in the Iron Kingdom, they're almost certainly slaves, if not executed immediately. And in the Empire, it seems like they are at best second-class citizens, also possibly slaves. In the battle section, the only part that I find interesting is the story focus mode, because I want to show this, because this will come up in the images. You'll see that in the story focus mode part of this battle section, there's like images that show like shown parry windows with press R1 or auto dodge or things like that. So they're showcasing that the game has a story focus mode. These images show that the gameplay will vary and that don't take this screenshot at face value of this is how the gameplay is actually going to be, right? Harder difficulty levels won't have these kind of handicaps in place. And yeah, let's go over to images because there's a few new images. So we have the Mother Crystal. This I'm pretty sure is probably just based on the blue coloring where we fight that Crystal Dragon. And so this must be one of the ones that we destroy. If it is the Crystal Dragon one, Clive has the tattoo on his face. So it's kind of like early middle part of the story. Someone on the subreddit pointed out that this giant crater here is most likely that crater that is on the map of Valsithia, just south of the Crystalline Dominion. Also makes sense with the geography since there's all desert here. Also, you'll see the chocobos and people in the distance. My guess is that's an enemy patrol. I don't know if it's scripted or a random encounter. Who knows? Although we've seen that they aren't afraid to kill chocobos in this game. This scene isn't particularly interesting other than the fact that Sleipnir is the name of the guy Clive is fighting. This will come up again a little bit later. I'm guessing this is just like a call name or call sign for the soldier. This might be a Wallowed soldier if it's Sleipnir because it'd be Odin's horse. Okay, this I mentioned earlier in the trailer. So we saw this fight scene in full action. Here you'll see the waypoint, so it kind of shows that it's probably not instance combat since there's a waypoint marker showing during combat. But the bigger thing is the Fallen Hunters. So the name Fallen Hunter implies, well, that they fell. And we know that there's an ancient civilization that used to be in the sky that fell. So my guess is that these enemies are actually related to that fallen civilization. And I feel pretty confident about that with how weird they look, right? They kind of look weird and futuristic and not quite right. Just kind of some hints about where the story might be going. This next scene has Torgal's menu in the bottom left. You'll see Sick, Heal, Ravage. So you can give commands to Torgal to do stuff, so that's cool. Okay, this is what I was talking about with the call signs. You'll notice that Clive's name is replaced with Wyvern, and we are fighting Tiamat. Tiamat appears to be the captain of the band of soldiers that we see at the beginning of the Awakening trailer. You know, the guy who's like, our goal is Shiva's dominant and only the dominant. That guy. And obviously, we're playing Clive, not Wyvern. So what it most likely is that these soldiers have call signs instead of their actual names. But kind of cool. Here's the ability tree. There's some translated versions of this online. I'm not going to be going through all this right now. I'm sure you can find other resources for it. But it looks pretty cool. And I think this is the last image in a marshland. We actually saw a scene like this earlier, right? With the Odin slash thing. And in the background, you'll see all those towers, which we've seen those towers in a couple places. One in the middle of the Deadlands. Oh, and this scene is also from the trailer. And all it really shows is that the falling Lancer people are actually enemies, because you'll notice there's a health bar on one of the ones falling. So the lightning is Cid, the falling dragoons is not. And that's it. That covers everything that we got in the trailer and the recent addition to the JP website. I tried to make it as kind of condensed as possible while still kind of trying to thoroughly cover everything. Like I mentioned multiple times, a lot of the things that we see are kind of guesswork. Like I said, want to make a video where I piece everything together chronologically. Because if you look, and you can do it yourself, you can look at Clive's armor, at the tattoo on his face, and in general the level. Don't use it as like your only reference, but I think in general the level. And you can pretty much piece together where we're going to go and when we're going to go there. The new scenes from this trailer that I'm not sure where they go is mostly fighting that crystalline dragon and the weird laser eye beam thing. Bahamut I'm not positive on either, but I know that'll be later in the game just based on how things are looking. I'm like almost positive it'll be after Titan, which Titan's like level 30-ish. So that's something you can do, or like I said, I'll be putting out a video shortly. I also want to apologize for my voice. I got a new mic and a pop filter, so hopefully the audio is a little better than my last one. But I also got a cold while I was recording all this, so my voice is kind of dead. So hopefully it wasn't too bad. Besides that, I hope you all have a good day. I hope you enjoy doing deep dives into the Final Fantasy 16 lore and trying to figure out what exactly is going on and forming your personal theories based on all these things that you're hearing from other people. And yeah, that's it. Have a good night.